You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Social media has turned therapy into a language that almost everyone seems to speak these days. I mean, if you scroll through your feed, odds are that you'll see lots of posts telling you things like everyone has trauma, that it's time to set some boundaries, or how to recognize gaslighting in relationships. While these ideas all come from real psychological concepts, online discussions about them often get totally stripped of nuance. Plus, these ideas risk being overused to the point where they become meaningless, and they sometimes get applied in ways that are actually harmful. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at the rise of therapy speak and how it's reshaping the way we talk about emotions, conflict, and relationships. We're also going to do a deep dive into one of the most viral buzzwords of all, love bombing. So what does love bombing really mean? When is it a red flag? And how can you tell the difference between someone who's actually trying to manipulate you and someone who is generally interested in a connection, but is just really direct about it? I am joined by Joe Nucci, a licensed psychotherapist, writer, and social media influencer. His content contextualizes mental health misinformation, pop psychology facts and fallacies, and culturally misunderstood ideas. Joe's work focuses on empowering individuals, whether or not they have a background in psychology, so that they can live life with a greater sense of agency and self-awareness. His debut book, Psychobabble, is available wherever books are sold. This is going to be a fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. For nearly 80 years, the Kinsey Institute has been the place where sex and relationships are understood. Now, you can help advance its expert-led research. This month, the Match Group is offering an incredible 2-to-1 match for all gifts to the Kinsey Institute Research Fund in recognition of its vital impact. Your donation will help fund important research on topics such as sexual well-being and aging, sexual assault prevention, shifting dating trends, and the impact of AI and technology on relationships. Donate now to help maintain the Kinsey Institute as the global hub to explore, discover, and share knowledge about sexuality, relationships, and human behavior. Be part of this crowdfunding campaign and make your gift to the Kinsey Institute Research Fund go further this October. Visit kinseyinstitute.org to participate in the Make Your Match campaign and support sex science. Hi, Joe, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to speak with you. So you recently published a book called Psychobabble, which aims to separate fact from fiction when it comes to mental health. So can you please give us the brief story behind this book? So in other words, what made you want to write it, and what do you hope it'll do for readers?
I wanted to write this book because when I started taking social media more seriously in terms of posting content, I started absorbing a lot more mental health and self-help related content. And I noticed something very interesting. It wasn't just that stuff was watered down, and it wasn't even just that stuff was like a half-truth or a falsehood. It was that the takeaways that people were having about mental health or self-help content was the opposite of what I think the typical practitioner or research in the field actually intends. And so what I try to let people know is I'm like, listen, like, you think I wasn't the number one offender of using Psychobabble like my first year of graduate school? Like, I think like most psychology students were, if they're being honest with themselves. But the difference is we kept studying, we kept getting into the nuance. And so my content, my book, Psychobabble, is really an invitation, I would say, to come take Psych 102. Don't stop at Psych 101. Like a basic example might be like people learn about attachment styles. Attachment styles are really important. They're validated via the research. I think there's something that everybody should know about. And I noticed that a lot of people are analyzing early stage courtship and dating using attachment styles when really these frameworks aren't helpful unless you attach to someone very, very quickly, which may happen, it may not happen, but as a practitioner, I usually see attachment styles show up months or even years into a relationship that somebody's having with their significant other. And so the danger of that isn't just that you're wrong, but people are using this framework to make decisions about their dating life, about their own mental health journey that's not actually based in anything true or hopeful. And my hope is that people get a little more curious and they can be empowered by the knowledge that our field has to offer.
Well, I love that. And I really appreciate that you're talking about this subject. As we've discussed many times before on this show, therapy speak has become so common on social media and in everyday conversation. For example, not a day goes by where I don't hear someone throw around terms like trauma, boundaries, and gaslighting. However, I've noticed that people use these terms to mean like wildly different things. If you take boundaries, for example, some people use that as a term to refer to the explicit rules that they have in their relationship. Other people use it as a way of expressing their understanding of their own limits. And yet others use it to kind of describe their preferences. We don't really seem to even have a shared understanding of what that term even means. And the same goes for something like gaslighting. Anymore, it seems like almost every disagreement gets labeled as gaslighting. The way people use these terms just feels so nebulous. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what are the potential problems here with our overuse of therapy speak and like calling everything gaslighting, for instance.
Really, there's so many problems. I wish we could talk for several hours and not just this time together, but we're going to do our best. So one problem is I'm noticing that when people get really interested in mental health or psychology, specifically when a lot of their education is coming from social media, they start to kind of flatten their experiences down into the same 5 terms. So every bad person is a narcissist, right? Every fight or disagreement is gaslighting. Every negative experience is a trauma. And there's actually some research out there that shows that the less words we have for our negative experiences, the less resilient we're going to be to them. And this is one of the reasons why psychologically trained professionals like you or I, we love to get granular, right? Like we love all the little labels and distinctions. It's not just because we're nerds for this stuff, although we are certainly guilty of that, I would say, but it's also because that's correlated with a certain kind of emotional resilience. I also think too that, we've never branded mental health more aggressively. We've never invested in it more. We've never talked about it more. I mean, I don't know what your corner of the world is like, Justin, but do you just feel like everyone is just drowning in mental health? Like we're just so well adjusted? Like, no, like actually, I think we're all experiencing the profound opposite despite all of this. And so when I started to notice that made me really curious, like, why is that? Like, what could be behind this weird paradox? And I think that one of the other reasons is that people will often look to psychology to have control over things that we unfortunately just don't have that much control over. And that's not the same claim as me saying that, psychology is a worthless subject. It doesn't have anything to offer. It has a lot to offer. It's my favorite subject. It's more that if you actually look at what goes viral, it's stuff around family, dating, parenting, finances, or kind of like career-oriented success. And all of these are domains in our lives that are incredibly meaningful, super important, that we need to all pay attention to one degree or the other. But unfortunately, we just don't often have as much control as we'd like to. When it comes to dating, as an example, even the most beautiful, most like famous celebrity that like and adore from afar, I promise, has struggled in their dating life. Like it's not easy. It's not easy to find people where there's mutual interest. And then beyond that, it's even harder to find people where there is a lot of reciprocity and values and what you're looking for. Timing matters so much more than any of us would like it to. And there's no analysis, there's no framework that psychology has to offer that can really solve for this problem of timing in dating, right?
Yeah.
Or fit or geography, proximity, right? And so I think that's the other thing is that people, it's this bid for control that I don't think we can have. And then unfortunately, I also see a lot of people use these terms and words as what I would call like an appeal to authority, where they're using psychology to make a point, even though there may not be that much in their point. It's a little bit like an air mattress. I'm forgetting who I'm borrowing this metaphor from, but the idea is that, an air mattress is wonderfully comfortable, but it's filled with nothing, And so if you're going on about the gaslighting or the trauma and what's really happening is you're actually just upset. That wasn't a fun experience. Or maybe you're in crisis. Like that's something else I really want to normalize that I've been thinking about recently. It's like you can be in crisis without it being a trauma, without it resulting in a trauma response. Like crises happen in life, little crises, big crises, significant ones, less significant ones. And so that's just kind of like the highlights of some of the things that I think go wrong when people start to rely on all this language.
Yeah, I think part of the appeal of therapy speak as well is that it gives us a language to try and understand the world around us. And there's nothing that people understand less than sex and relationships, right? Because we don't get a lot of formal education in these areas. And this kind of gives us a lens for how to interpret things that might otherwise be ambiguous. But I think, in my view, one of the big problems here is that a lot of these terms encourage us to engage in really binary thinking, like it's
Yeah,
either gaslighting or it's not, right? And so
totally.
when we start thinking about it through that kind of narrow lens, like I think it leads us to overinterpret a lot of things and label some things inaccurately. And, that's where a lot of this stuff can kind of go off the rails.
I love that you brought up binary thinking because I find that particularly on the internet, but also I would say it's the number one cognitive distortion that I'm working with in my practice. And what do you think about this? I kind of have this theory about mental health, which is that our brains are like any other organ. They want to be metabolically efficient. And for those listening, I'm not touching on I know there's some interesting metabolic theories of mental illness. That's not what I mean. I don't mean like a brain energy, biological thing. I mean more like metaphorically, it's our bodies are going to want to take shortcuts. We're going to want to conserve calories, right?
Mhm.
And one of the ways we might do that is by resorting to simpler schemas like black and white thinking or like these different formulas. And those are great. They work until they don't. And mental health is a domain in which oftentimes it's not going to work because so much of our lives and our relationships, I mean, particularly like dating and sexuality, so much of it is in the nuance. And sometimes I think that I want to normalize that it's like we can all fall prey to it because our nervous systems are trying to be efficient with the resources that it has. But I also want to say almost nothing, at least in my experience, really is that black or white. And if you start making decisions as if it is, well, you're going to meet all sorts of dysfunction, you know?
Yeah, I mean, everything is ambiguous when it comes to relationships. And people have never wanted more clarity and more efficiency now than in this time of online dating, where they're kind of overwhelmed by choices and decisions. And so I think that further encourages us to kind of go down that path of this very binary thinking because we have so many decisions to make and we need to try and make them quickly. And we don't always make the right ones.
I would love to ask you, what do you see in terms of your niche areas in your work? Because I've been thinking a lot about this question of control that you just brought up. And it kind of seems like today's not just dating market and not just dating apps, but really our culture. It's like we all want so much control. And I'm guilty of this too. I like to optimize, I got my morning routine going, but I don't know if that's really what the good life is all about. And I've been thinking about this recently because not that long ago, I started seeing somebody I care for very deeply. It's happy and healthy and it's reciprocated. But one of the things I'm noticing about this experience of being in love, and I haven't been in love like this in a very, very long time, potentially ever. But one of the things I'm noticing about it is there's this quality of surrender where I'm I don't actually have a choice about this. You know what I mean? I'm actually if things were to get rocky, which of course they will, no relationship is perfect. It's kind of we'll talk about it. I'll fight for it. That's how much this matters to me. But it's this really interesting paradox for me because I feel before getting in relationship with this person, there was this experience of wanting to have more control. It's I want the perfect person with these qualities. I have my little list. I'm going to manifest them. And in a lot of ways, they are perfect, but they're not necessarily what was on the list. And yet my limbic system, my reptile brain is just a full on yes. I don't know. I don't really know what my question is here. I guess I just kind of wanted to, I've been thinking about this idea of control and how there's actually something now that I've quote unquote found what I'm looking for or think that I have, there's actually not that much control in it, which is super, I don't know. I just think it's worth noting. It's worth talking about because I'm not the only one that talks about experiencing a good connection in this way.
I think most of us do want to have control in this way over love and dating and relationships, but those are things that are not really controllable. And, the more control that we try to exert and the more that we try to fit things into certain boxes to, fit that, say, shopping list approach to love that we might have, the harder it is for us to find contentment and fulfillment. And so in some ways, we kind of have to just give up some of that control and just kind of go with the flow and be open to different possibilities and opportunities. Because I think the more narrowly focused we become and the more we try to tightly control our outcomes there, the less likely it is that we find what it is that we're actually looking for.
I completely agree, but it's weird, right? And there's so many paradoxes because particularly in like on dating apps, being too open, having too many options also leads to like lower traction, lower satisfaction, a lot of time wasted. It's this weird balancing act, or maybe that's not even the right way to think of it, but it's like you have to kind of meander out of like exerting control or wanting control and then like the surrender to the process.
Yeah, totally. Low libido is something that a ton of people struggle with. So it's not surprising that there are lots of supplements on the market offering to give yours a boost. But let's be honest, finding one that actually lives up to the hype is tough because this market is full of products that contain questionable ingredients, are underdosed, or that just don't work, which is why I was excited to discover Drive Boost by VV Health. VV Health is in the business of trust and transparency. Their libido supplement is doctor-formulated, rigorously third-party tested for purity and potency, and it's made right here in the USA. Drive Boost is also unique because it's formulated for men and women alike. So if you're ready to ditch the shady stuff and choose a libido supplement that's actually effective and that you can feel confident about, it's time to check out Drive Boost. Learn more and get yours at vb.health. Visit vb.health and use code Justin for 10% off or click the link in the show notes. So let's talk about some of the popular myths that you debunk in your book. And since this is a podcast about sex and relationships, we're going to focus on the myths that center around those topics. So since we're on the subject of love, let's talk about love bombing, which is a term that is increasingly being thrown around on social media to describe any number of behaviors in which people kind of deem them as being excessively affectionate, I guess, if you will. But what does love bombing actually mean? So how would you define that term?
Oh, this is the one I get really fired up about, particularly because, like I just mentioned, I'm newly like seeing someone and I take it personally, like this insinuation that if we're moving at a certain pace, that it's somehow unhealthy. The traditional definition of love bombing is it's actually a manipulative and emotionally abusive act. It's you shower someone with affection and praise, and you do that so they fall for you quickly, so you gain control over them, or at the very least, so you can learn personal details about them, intimate details that maybe you haven't earned yet because you don't actually feel those ways about them. And then they use it to control you later or to manipulate you later. It's a horrible thing. And I think it's good that more people are talking about it. I just wish that more people were talking about it with a little bit of accuracy. I'm thinking of someone who's like maybe like a teenager, right? Or maybe in their early 20s and they're a little bit younger and less mature and they're a little bit more naive, and somebody a little bit older than them approaches them and starts to love bomb them. They start to shower them with gifts and declarations of commitment and all this stuff. And they're so excited and they feel seen and they like this person too. And so they throw all caution to the wind. We can all look at that if there's like an age discrepancy in the dating. And we can all kind of wonder, we're like, oh, well, like that, maybe something feels fishy about that, right? Now, there doesn't have to be an age discrepancy for the love bombing to work. But what I'm really like pointing to is that, again, like there's kind of this like intentional manipulative dynamic. And I'm curious like how you've seen it come up with people. But I mean, for me, this is the one I get fired up with, and not just for personal reasons, but I just think it's such fucking bullshit. Like I really, really do, because, you know, I'm watching people date and be on the dating market. And I'm not saying that everyone is moving like at crazy lightning speed. Like I haven't observed that at all. But I know that when people meet someone that has that spark that they're looking for, they plan the next date. They let them know how they're feeling. They're actually very like forward in a lot of ways. And like, you know, is it love bombing? I don't know. In the book, I was only able to find one poll on love bombing. And I thought this was so funny. It was something like over 50 or 60%. Don't quote me on that, but it was a significant percentage of the people had reported dating someone and the person saying, I love you to them within 1 month of dating. But then in the same poll, they were all like, well, I would rather date a love bomber than someone who is emotionally unavailable.
Right.
But this is a false dichotomy, like I said, because I don't think these people are saying I would rather date someone who doesn't actually love me and is like trying to manipulate me and abuse me. I think that the psychobabble has actually completely invalidated the study, but it's worth talking about anyways, because it just shows how messy this term has been. I mean, I don't know like what your opinion is on if there's any sort of literature, any sort of best practice like around pacing or, you know, like how slow or fast to take things. But I think that my 2 cents is that, you know, some people fall in love and like stay together for years. Other people take it really slow and end up divorcing 2 years after they get married. Like you really have to figure out like what works for you.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about just my own parents as an example, you know, when they met, it was literally like 5 months from the day they met till the day they got married. Like that is pretty fast in my view. And they've still been together this whole time. You know, they're approaching nearly 50 years together. By contrast, I have other family members who have had that same seemingly kind of quick timetable of, you know, they meet and then they're married within a matter of months. And then within a year, they're divorced, right? So there's no like one size fits all rule in terms of what is the quote unquote right or correct speed. But sometimes people do take things too fast, right? So if I think about an example from my own life, I remember a first date that I went on many years ago. And I came home afterwards to find an email from my date that said something along the lines of, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Well, I know that I do. And I think I'm in love with you. And for me, that was like coming on too strong. Like we just got back literally from our first date. And so for me, that was like a block and delete kind of situation because I was just like,
so fair.
I was not ready for that. I mean, it also turned out that this person didn't tell me in advance that they were married. And so I was like a side piece too. So it was like a complicated situation.
There's some data points that we need to consider.
There were a few red flags there, but regardless, you know, I love you on the first date is like a little bit too much for me. And I think a lot of people today would call that love bombing, but is that just moving too quickly, right? You know, I guess the question is, how do you differentiate or determine those two things? Like, is this person just like really interested in me and we had this instant connection, or are they manipulating me? Like, I think that's the hard thing to answer.
Totally. Well, for me, something that I've been thinking a lot about is the difference between love as the feeling versus love as like the action or the commitment. You know, in English, we use this one word to mean all these different things. And I think it takes some maturing and some life experience to realize that it does mean different things to different people. And of course it does. Like I love my family in a much different way than like I would love a partner, right? Or a potential future child or like a friend, you know, who I like hit it off with. And it's like, I fucking love you, dude. Or like, you know, whatever, like, you know what I mean? And so as I think about those differences, the anecdote that's coming up to mind is years and years ago. It was a very brief dating relationship with this guy. And I know that we met out like at a bar and took him home. And the next morning after sex, he told me that he loved me. And like, listen, I don't move slow like in my relationships or dating, but that was a bit fast for me. And I remember talking to my therapist about it that week in therapy because I was being, you know, rightly or wrongly judgmental. And I remember the therapist said something that I thought was so wise. They said, I mean, like maybe it's crazy of them. Like maybe this is a huge red flag, or maybe that was like super vulnerable, like an awesome. And that's what was authentically like coming up for them. And it really broadened my perspective on not just that word, but really like how to understand people's words like in context. Another thing that recently came up with a friend who's in an open relationship is they were saying they were having really passionate sex and they'd recently opened up their relationship after a period of exclusivity. And they had been used to saying, I love you during sex. And they said it to this person and it really freaked the person out. And they kind of, they stopped the sex. They were very like turned off by it. And we were laughing about it because it's so funny because people will like dirty talk in sex. Like they'll be like, you know, you fucking bitch, you fucking whore. And then it's like understood that like, this is just kind of kinky and like, you don't actually mean this. Mm-hmm. But then if someone says, I love you during sex, it's like not like allowed, like, you know what I mean? Which is so weird, you know, like, mm-hmm. But I don't know. Those are just some of the things that come up for me. It's, I think it's all context.
Totally. And, something else that you talk about in the book is that, there can be a lot of different reasons why somebody might move quickly that have nothing to do with love bombing. One of them that I thought was really interesting was that some people might be rushing intimacy in order to avoid intimacy. And that's going to sound confusing to some listeners. So can you explain to us what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So, one of the benefits to going slow with someone is that you have time to really understand who they are in a really thorough way. You have time to build that actual trust and not just this sense of closeness that love and sex and pheromones can make you feel towards someone, because that kind of closeness that the love, sex, and hormones make you feel, that's not the same thing as trust, in my view. I think trust takes time. The same therapist I was just bringing up earlier, another pearl of wisdom that therapist gave to me was, she said, you're very good at psychology. You can articulate someone's personality within minutes of talking to them, but character takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It takes more than one date. I don't know how many it really takes, but it takes at least more than one, right? And when you rush intimacy, right, when you start telling people things about yourself, when you start feeling a level of commitment to them right away, and I'm not even saying that those feelings are wrong or they're not genuine or they're inauthentic. I imagine that they probably are. One of the disadvantages is you don't have that benefit of trust over time. And so what we often see is this kind of, if you picture like a graph where like the level of intensity or the level of love is on the y-axis and time is on the x-axis, you see it very, very high in the beginning. You see it spike and you see it kind of start to go down, but then it'll drop off. The relationship might end almost immediately. Like, why? Well, you got hot and heavy with someone, you got intimate fast, and now the risk is really high, but they haven't earned that trust yet. And so it can feel very unstable. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of us actually understand this intuitively. And whether or not we're doing it consciously, I think sometimes people rush, they love bomb because they don't actually want to do the tedious work that is building a relationship, that is integrating a life with someone, that's getting to know someone. Like, I think Dan Savage has this like great saying, it's like warts and all self, like all of like the ugly parts that you keep covered up. But then you also have to let them in. And just because you feel wonderfully close or attracted to somebody or you have a lot of fun or a lot of passion with them, that doesn't necessarily mean you want to do that. Another pearl of wisdom, just while I'm firing them out there. I feel like all my therapists are in the room with us today. But I remember I was so twisted up over this dude one time because our sex was just, it was so like chemical. Like I was so attracted to him. So wrong for me. Like I knew that. Like I'm not going to like give you more details because I don't want to like embarrass the guy. Like so wrong for me in every single way. And I was so twisted up about it. And I remember talking to my therapist and I remember being like, he's so wrong for me. And he's like, well, why can't you just like enjoy this physical relationship or end it and move on? But it's like, why are you so twisted up? And I was like, well, because it's like, he's so wrong for me, but it's like, I feel like I love him. And my therapist goes, Joseph, didn't anybody ever tell you, you can love your fuck buddy? Just don't marry the one that you're not a good fit for. And it's kind of simple, like when you say it out loud, but it really like hit me in this way where it gave me permission to feel the intensity of whatever we were feeling and also recognize this is not a relationship. There is actually not that much trust here. And it did end as it was always going to. And so anyways, I'm rambling. To recap your question, rushing intimacy to avoid it, I think it's a little bit like you rush into the deep end of the pool and it's deep and it's fast and that's like intense because you just dove right in. But then you're floating there with someone. You have to keep each other afloat. And you actually haven't known them that long. You actually don't know, like, are they good at swimming? Right? Do I want to be in this pool with them? And then you will both exit if one or both of you feels like it's not what you thought. And part of that is normative, right? But I do think that some people need to make that conscious for themselves. I don't know if everyone is.
Yeah. So this is really kind of a tough thing in terms of like, what is the ideal pacing for a relationship? And I think ultimately it's a really subjective thing. Some people move very quickly. Some people take things very slow, and you can see benefits and drawbacks to both of those approaches. Sometimes if you're taking things too slowly, well, the other person can lose interest and think that you're not really serious about the relationship. And then you miss out on an opportunity, and that person might have been a great match for you, right? I know everybody wants clarity. Like they want like a certain rule to follow, if you will, about how they should approach relationships and dating. But there just aren't any of these rules that you can follow that are going to guarantee a certain outcome. You have to do what feels right and safe for you, I guess.
Well, I think what's her name? She has a great social media presence. I think I read her book. Is it like Jillian Terlecki or something? Do you know who I'm talking about? She had this awesome viral video where she was saying that, it's like, yeah, like be vulnerable if you can handle it going wrong. And that doesn't mean that like you won't have consequences if it goes wrong or you won't like feel bad or like whatever. But it was just like, if you dive in head first with someone, just to like put it onto the pacing question, you put them on your Instagram, you tell people about them, and then a few months later, it just wasn't meant to last longer than that. Like, can you handle that?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I know that's been a very helpful guiding question. So to anyone listening or watching, I think when you're trying to figure out your own pace of courtship and dating, I think that's what I would invite you to ask. I would remind you that the heartbreak is one of the most like painful things a lot of us like experience, and it is pretty survivable. Like it's like, I would say 99, if not like 100% of people like do get over it. It may not feel that way. I know it's easier said than done. I was talking to a friend recently, and like in a weird way, I think my content has made me like better at dating in the sense where it's like, I practice being vulnerable for the camera. And so it's a muscle that I have that other people might not. And one of the things I said to this friend is I was just like, they're either not going to like you back or it's going to end and it's going to be very painful, or you're going to get married and it's going to be kind of painful. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, there's pain like in your future. So you might as well just fucking go for it. You know what I mean? Like, what do you have to lose? I don't think that makes you naive. I think that makes you super wise. But the issue with the psychobabble, with the love bombing kind of buzzword is that everyone thinks that like the wise thing to do is to go like at a snail's pace. And okay, wait, actually, Justin, I have a hot take and I kind of want to know what you think of it.
Okay.
So it's not just her, and I actually really like her and a lot of her content, but the holistic psychologist, I think, has, really pioneered a lot of self-help on social media in a lot of ways. And I know that, this idea of like emotional safety and like kind of taking things like one step at a time. And like, this is something that I've seen her post about. If it didn't originate with her, it has really like proliferated through her brand. And I just remember being like, and again, this is no shade like to her or anyone like listening, because again, pace is very individual as we've discussed. But I have thought to myself, I'm like, you are a lesbian. Like there are like, whether it's social or biological, or like that's just a whole separate conversation I don't really want to have with you, but it's just like there are differences like between the genders. And so for me, I'm just like, oh, like interesting. Is this advice like applicable to me like as a gay man? Right? Or like, is it applicable to just different types of people who want different things in their relationship? Like maybe emotional safety is the number one thing for this person, but maybe another person isn't looking for that. Maybe another person is looking for the passion and the fireworks, and they're not necessarily looking for longevity. I just think it's interesting, in our weird influencer world that we live in, that I think we forget to think about like the people and their biases. I know I do when I'm putting out content sometimes.
It's a tricky thing. And I think it gets back to the fact that a lot of content on social media, a lot of it is being put out there by very well-intentioned people who are trying to help others. But there is this tendency toward oversimplification and making it sound like there are these one-size-fits-all rules that apply to everybody. And what makes somebody feel loved or turned on or aroused like is a highly individual thing. And, I remember doing some work a few years ago for a specific app around relationships. And it was really promoting this idea that, safety is at the core of eroticism. And I'm like, it is for some people, but actually feeling a little unsafe is something that is very arousing for some other people, where there's that kind of element of danger and uncertainty. And so again, it's like just different for different people.
Well, that's kind of like Esther Perel's thing, right? Like we are going to actually juxtapose desire and intimacy. I think that there's something to that. I like a lot of her work. And to your point, not everyone is built the same. For some people, actually, it is through deeper intimacy that they get to achieve like really profound experiences like of desire and passion. It's so individual. And I also think it's like, it depends on like your stage of life. Yep. Like it's temporal. You know what I mean? Like I know like when I'm in my 20s, some of the experiences I've shared today, like on the podcast, it's like, I'm like an intern. I'm just kind of up for anything. I'm just up for the experience. I just want to get it on my resume. Like I'm like sowing my oats, you know what I mean? Like I'm like out there, but then you get a little bit older and you're just like, well, that's not as appealing to me anymore, because it's like, you know what? I've tried this thing once or more than once, and I actually decided I don't like that, or I don't want to date this type of person, or I don't want this type of sexual experience. And it's a little bit less intern energy and a little bit more like corner office executive. It's like, this meeting better be important because I'm busy, you know? And so different things might be appealing at different stages as well.
Totally. Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation, Joe. I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation in the next episode and diving even deeper into sex and relationship myths. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
Thank you so much. This was great. So my name is Joe Nucci. That's N as in Nancy, UCCI for those who are listening. Joe Nucci Therapy on all the socials, joenuccitherapy.com, and Psychobabble, Viral Mental Health Myths and the Truths to Set You Free is available wherever books are sold.
Great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.